Good evening and a very warm welcome to you. Thank you so much for joining us on Economics 101, where we focus on all things relating to the economy. Once again, we do implore you to be part of the conversation. Feel free to get a hold of us on our social media platforms. That's ZBC News Online. Send us your questions, comments, and your contributions during the course of the discussion. As we always do appreciate hearing from you. Today, we're joined by two very special guests taking a very close look at the issues of sanctions being imposed on Zimbabwe, but more importantly, the effects that those have on the economy. I'm currently joined by Mr. Joshua Maponga, who is an social engineer and also has got quite a few inclinations in a line with Pan-Africanism and the economy. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Don't call me Mr. next time. I never earned that title. I'm not British.
How would you like us to refer to you today?
I'm 52 years old. How old are you?
I'm significant enough to be able to at least acknowledge that.
And how do you address a person of my age in your culture?
How would you like me to address you?
I'm Mkoma Josh.
Mkoma Josh.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Mkoma Josh. Glad to have you joining us here today. And I'm also joined in a studio by Mr. Rutendo Matinyarare, who is an anti-sanctions activist and also a marketing strategist. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. And I can refer to you as Mr.
Yes, you can.
Thank you very much. Now, this discussion is imperative in at least being able to appreciate the significance of sanctions on the economy. And I'll start off with you, Mr. Matinyarare. Zimbabwe having been imposed under sanctions for close to 2 decades. Are they right? But more importantly, how do we address them with respect to the economy?
I think I need to correct a misconception that people believe that sanctions in Zimbabwe started in 2000. They actually started in 1980 when we got independence, got left with Rhodesian debt, got left with Rhodesian underdevelopment, and were not given reparations for the destruction the Rhodesians had cost us, which is way over $1 trillion. Then we went under South African apartheid sanctions that were assisted by the West and the CIA, which were trying to preserve apartheid in South Africa. We had to fight a war, and 2 wars, in fact, for South Africa's independence, in which one of them we actually took a loan of over $4 billion to replace our equipment, to replace our military equipment. Then we get into ESAP, which was designed by being given the Rhodesian debt, being put under sanctions by South Africa and having to fight these wars. It all drained our money, and it was intentionally done by the West so that we get into ESAP when we want to borrow money to develop our education system, our hospitals, and the underdevelopment of what the British had left us.
Right.
Then we get to 2000, we were already a country that had been under a regime of sanctions, which also include the underdevelopment of the UN sanctions and the war that we fought for our own liberation.
Okay.
So that's the context.
Right. Appreciating that context, economic challenges having affected Zimbabwe as a result of the post-colonial period. Now, I do want to bring in Mkoma Maponga in the discussion. When it comes to being able to appreciate some of the social impacts that the sanctions have had on Zimbabwe, what are your sentiments?
When you divorce a woman, you don't have to worry as to who is she going to marry, who is she going to date, and which house is she coming from. It's none of your business. You have packed your bags and you've walked away.
Right.
So if you walk away from a business relationship or a political relationship, why are you still interested in inflicting pain? I mean, it's one thing to rape a person. It's another thing now to design for them a process of their recovery. It's another thing now to want to supervise their mourning and their pain. You become sadistic, you become narcissistic. It's enough that the colonizers abused us to this extent. It's enough to say they're owing us billions and trillions of dollars. It's another thing to ensure that even by the time they're trying to recover, you ensure that they will not recover.
Well, one would
The social impact, therefore, is not only health, it's not only educational, it's not only brain drain, it's not only the drying up and constantly keeping Zimbabwean companies as raw material suppliers instead of manufacturers of finished products, so that the economy can actually breathe in the space of their own resources.
Right. I would like for you to extend this particular point. One would argue that to some degree, the moment that Zimbabwe gained its independence through an armed struggle, what we got to the point was of bygones were bygones. That we'd all agree that the transgressions that one imposed on the other were now in the past, moving then as a result forward. That seems to have not been the case.
International custom tells us that there is never bygones that are bygones if there's no restoration or restitution. And that is why you see that when the Jews were oppressed just for 5 years by the Germans, they had to get restitution. And the restitution they had to get is up to $100 billion that has been paid by Germany so far, and they're still paying these reparations, plus the $40 billion that came from the Americans. Then we have the Marshall Plan that was given to the rest of Europe and the whole world and Asia so that they could begin to develop. But what happened within that period is that Africa was then given what we call the Morgenthau Plan. So the world is given a Marshall Plan to help it to reindustrialize. Africa is given a Morgenthau Plan to actually deindustrialize it, make it agrarian, and make it a basic resource extractor. That is where the biggest problem is. And so we as Africans have not realized that we were given the opposite of the Marshall Plan. We do not realize that we did not get reparations. We thought that we could just get up from where we left off and begin to develop. But remember,
I want to add on that, Rutendo.
Right.
Freedom without justice equals slavery or continuous slavery, which you call neocolonialism. You, the educated people.
Right.
So you cannot be talking about a country got independence, it is free.
Right.
And yet justice has not been done.
Right.
You disenfranchised people, and then you tell them that they are free, but you still keep their resources in your hands.
and not only that, look at the white farmers now. They got their land sequestrated, stolen land sequestrated. So stolen product taken back to its rightful owners. They are asking for compensation of $3.5 billion because of stealing and making developments. So what's your take on
government's current position in addressing that?
Government has been pushed in a corner, which is why people like me are beginning to fight sanctions vociferously, because our policies are not being instituted on international custom, best practice, or what is just.
Right.
We are being forced to make rules and laws that suit our colonizers and our sanction senders instead of suiting us as the people of Zimbabwe. We should be asking for reparations. We should be asking for restoration of what we lost. We should be asking for all the unjust enrichment that all the farmers, companies like Anglo America, and the big companies that used to own mines here, to restore us in the position that we were and to return the unjust enrichment instead of us paying compensation for stolen land that these people bought and signed BIPA agreements on,
so then how does
without returning that land to its rightful owners.
I'd love to hear your opinion on how it turns as though we're seeking compensation when we readdress through policies such as Zimbabwe is open for business, that Zimbabwe is opening up itself out to the rest of the world, Zimbabwe recently engaging even with the Commonwealth.
You have to understand that our government cannot make policies without thinking about removing these sanctions. And as long as our government has to think of ways to remove these sanctions, they're going to make policies that make the sanction senders happy, that make the international community happy. Who is the international community? It's the same people that colonized us, the same people that enslaved us, the same people that have gone for 700 years controlling our factors of production, because that's how they survive.
Right.
So until we begin to say to our government, we have an option to remove the sanctions legally and not politically, then we'll give our government leverage to start making laws for Zimbabwe.
But in the midst of unity, had Africa been united, when you put us on sanctions, we also put you on sanctions.
I was going to say to you, Mkoma Josh, on that particular note, what would you say to the argument that, or to the critique rather, people say that Zimbabweans use the issue of colonization, imperialism, all as scapegoats to address the real issue, which is mismanagement of economic resources?
People must not be naive. People must not be naive to the real issues and the causes of the fundamental causes of some of these issues that we are talking about. By the time you're talking about sanctions, it is the external world which is now waging war with the local economy for the disagreements, whatever they have, with the businesses that are happening in that space.
Right.
Put it on record. Politics is nothing. Religion is nothing. Economics and business is everything.
Right.
Because even wars need sponsorships in terms of money. So at the end of the day, when you destabilize multinational companies in your country, and you make your environment unconducive for their abuse,
Right.
then they turn around and say, we'll tell all our friends around. It's almost like this is stupid. I quarrel with Benson, and then I say, come to you and say, don't talk to him. I go to, don't talk to him, because I've quarreled with him.
Right.
We cannot be dragged in that. Your enemies become my enemies, and your friends must become my friends.
And not only that, remember that sanctions themselves are illegal even in wartime. So when two nations are trying to destroy each other,
That's the United
they
Nations.
are not allowed to utilize sanctions. That's the Geneva Convention as well. You cannot use sanctions to destroy infrastructure and to destroy the ability for civilians to get services or economic activity. And if you do that, that is a war crime.
Right.
If you do that, then you should be taken to to Nuremberg, where the Nazis were taken to Nuremberg
Right.
for doing exactly that to its neighbors.
Right.
That says that there is an understanding that sanctions are the highest form of destruction of a nation than even war.
Accepting that particular point, Mkwama Joshua raised a point about creating a conducive environment, right? An environment that also at the same time allows those who are perpetrating whatever impositions on you to not have a friendly space to work in, but one that can actually evoke meaning for the people who are there. Zimbabwe imposed an indigenization policy on the people of Zimbabwe,
before you move there, you're leaving something very important.
On that note, before we get there, we'll take a short break and be right back with more. Stay tuned to Economics 101. Right. Now, Mkwama Joshua, there's a point that you wanted to be able to address.
I was saying before you move over to the other point,
right.
I wanted to address the issue of sanctions. Categorically clear. Ukata benzi ukapisa imba ya baba wako na akayako madota, you inherit ashes.
Yeah.
Any local company, any local political party that therefore supports sanctions becomes an act of terrorism to its own people.
Right.
In cahoots with foreign companies. Because take note, this is not about local companies that are arguing. This is about multinational companies that want to do business. And so please, you cannot remove our teeth from the meat that we're eating. And then local people are going to say, please bite some more.
What would you then say to the approach that the opposition political party came as a result of economic challenges that Zimbabwe was going through, mainly in light with the trade union organizations?
The trade unions, of course, and the basis of their coming into spaces of function was that they were already in agreements, as it were, with a democratic system of driving governance here without necessarily addressing the basic issue. I say that categorically clear. Show me the companies, show me the businesses that the opposition parties have created. Show me how many jobs they have created.
Mr. Matinyarare, your sentiments.
What is weird for me is that by the time that the opposition party was set up and came up, it was a period in which Zimbabwe had the second biggest stock exchange in Africa.
Sure.
Which is very interesting. That shouldn't that have correlated to a change in the economy that was emancipating the people of Zimbabwe? It didn't. Because when capital comes into your country, foreign direct investment comes in, it comes to suck value and to take that excess value out of the country, which leaves the people with nothing. So when MDC was starting to say that we are protesting, or when the ZCTU started protesting, they were protesting because of conditions that were created by a maintenance of neocolonialism, a maintenance of neocolonialism that came in the manifestation of neoliberal policies that said, you must devalue your dollar.
For example,
you must not support your local businesses. You must not subsidize your local
foreign
businesses.
Companies running.
And you must allow foreign goods to come into your country and kill your small countries, your small companies in your own country, which is what happened in Zimbabwe. No one looks at that. That's part of the war that I spoke about, that it was a Rhodesian debt, a continuation of Rhodesian underdevelopment, sabotage from the apartheid government, us sponsoring the war to free South Africa and getting to ISAP that gets us to this
What about
point.
the other argument that at the same time that there were war veterans at that particular period in time who felt that they too had not managed to find economic prosperity within Zimbabwe, and there was a debt that was owed to them to also be able to
remove
the prosperity of Zimbabwe. Your sentiments to that point?
Of course. The war veterans should have been the very first people that should have been settled before we started settling debts from a colonizer.
Right.
Number one. Number two, that's why we say there should have been reparations paid for restoration of these men and women that had to fight unnecessarily against a crime against humanity that was instituted by a powerful country like the British. And then finally we have to get to the point that we should never have compensated white people for their land in a willing buyer, willing seller. We should never have been looking at paying Rhodesian debts without taking care of the war veterans. So when people people make war veterans an excuse for why the economy crashed, why don't you look at the fact that we had to pay white farmers for land that was ours? Why don't we look at us having to deal with underdevelopment of Rhodesia and paying Rhodesian debts as the problem?
The longest agreement in the sunset clauses, the Zimbabwe received pressure from the SADC region for economic benefits to the South African war that was still happening. And in the midst of that conversation, what we need to understand is that people must study that document carefully. That Zimbabwe was not supposed to address the issue of land until after 25 years.
Right.
So our first regime, Honorable Robert Mugabe, when he went into power, he was under duress. The government of Britain was contributing money, I don't know whether it's monthly or quarterly, to the economy, as long as the resources in the country were not being tampered with.
Right.
Come the time when Tony Blair refused to honor his agreements, I don't want to mix my words. The first regime negotiated with the enemy, and to keep to the terms and conditions of that agreement, land had not to be touched. It's only after the revolution of the war veterans who felt they were not compensated. It was 25 years later, and some of them were dying.
Right.
That's the reason we went to war. We didn't go to war to fight for toilets, to share toilets with white people. We didn't go to war to fight for freedom and democracy. We went to war to fight for land.
Right.
Full stop.
Right. Right. Now, appreciating, of course, land and its involvement, we currently find ourselves, and I'm glad that you do bring up the old dispensation, we find ourselves in a new one, where Zimbabwe seems to be making a trajectory that looks to be able to have an economic viable position by the year 2030. Look at having a middle-income economy. And the current position that has been brought forward is the National Development Strategy 1. Does that strategy address the issue of sanctions? And if so, how?
Well, first of all, the National Development Strategy has got some key components that I support in the aspect that we've got to stabilize the economy, we've got to begin to grow the economy, we've got to make sure that our people are eating first. We cannot build a country with people that are not eating. And then they talk about governance as a third point, that we actually need to monitor, plan, and be able to determine whether what it is that we've planned is actually coming into fruition.
Sure.
Then we must start to localize what it is that must be done and to produce here to make sure we've got local industry. Brilliant. I mean, what more can you ask than that? And then you will see that if you look at those pillars, and then at the bottom at number 8, you begin to see re-engagement. You'll see that this government has been able to do all those things. And in re-engagement, they added another tweak where they legalized the fight against sanctions and began to go to multilateral institutions. So that re-engagement process ceases to be about bilateral re-engagements, but going to engage the rest of the world in order to gain Zimbabwe back its image and its reputation, which the special rapporteur, when she came here, made a good job of doing, to say that these sanctions are illegal, these sanctions are a crime against humanity, meaning that this reputation that Zimbabwe had that we're being punished for not, for being corrupt, number one, and for crimes against humanity have been debunked and put off the table. Zimbabwe's reputation is back. And if we begin to work on all the other pillars, creating industry in Zimbabwe, making sure that we've got food, driving our agriculture, which drives our industry, definitely on the right path.
How is that going to be answered through social engineering? Because I do want to appreciate your very clear appreciation of that particular area.
We cannot say we are going to build an economy where the software of running that economy is not in order.
Okay.
Right, land is a resource. There it is. That's your mining, that's your water, that's your agriculture, that's your housing.
Sure.
But you need, therefore, to make NDS work, there's a missing block on the land redistribution program, which is the training program. So that you don't give a teacher 400 hectares of land, and then he goes there and sells the tractor and digs up everything else. Because we've given, yes, the concept of giving to a black is fine. But how about you take 100 youths and you divide 100 hectares into 10 hectares each. And then you place each one of these trained poultry, agricultural, animal husbandry people and into those pieces of land. Utilization becomes important.
Right.
But so I want to challenge you. Why are we talking about giving youth land when every youth in Zimbabwe has got a village where there's already land? Are we using the land today? I can't ask for land right now because I haven't finished developing my land in Sonzo. What's your take on that? That do we continue to train youth and give them new land when they haven't even used what?
I would agree with that, but on a percentage, the percentage I want to keep on is that the land that we are talking about, which was being grabbed, is the real fertile land, proper land where commercial agriculture was happening. We understand even that the allocation of black people during the times of colonialism they were moved from fertile land into Mindamirefu, where the rain seasons and etc. are horrible. So you have 40 hectares of land, but you have 20, 30 millimeters of water. And what can you do with that?
But
so
you've been to Israel. You've been to Israel. You've seen the
technology, training.
Israelites are using the desert and turning.
No, I'm with you. But then that's when you need, if the government could play into that space where we say, of the land that we have in our rural areas, which is not being utilized, what kind of technologies and science do we need to implement to activate those economies so that we don't keep on grabbing land on this side, but utilizing what we already have?
And fixing the software of our young people.
Well, if there's one thing that can be guaranteed is that there's never enough time to be able to cover all. So we should take a short break and we'll be back with more Economics 101. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the third segment of Economics 101, where we're focusing on all things relating to the economy. Once again, we do employ you to be part of the conversation. Get a hold of us on our social media platform. That's ZBC News Online. Currently joined in the studio by my guest, Joshua Maponga, who is a social engineer. And I'm also joined by Mr. Rutendo Matinyarare, who is an anti-sanctions activist and also a marketing strategist. Now, before we took the break, we're looking very closely at some of the land-related issues when it comes to Zimbabwe's economy. Command agriculture having been imposed or having been brought in during the previous dispensation. We've now got it from Vudza and Twasa, and many other initiatives are being brought in the second dispensation to be able to ensure that the young people or people within Zimbabwe do have access to land. Currently, at the moment, with the current drive, are we seeing economic drivers that indicate themselves towards ensuring that Zimbabwe's relevance when it comes to sanctions has been finally nullified? Or does the world still feel that despite Zimbabwe's austerity measures and the different economic policies, we deserve sanctions?
I think Zimbabwe has been confused in its policy. We're beginning to get together to depoliticize the fight against sanctions, as I said, to internationalize it, to begin to deal with it legally and make it a human rights issue, which reminds people that Zimbabweans are human beings. Because I think for many years now, people have begun to see Zimbabweans as animals because we've not stood up for ourselves and we've not made it a point that we demand our human rights, which are being contravened by the sanctions. And another point is that we have not galvanized the region to support Zimbabwe in the way that Rhodesia was supported by South Africa and Portuguese Mozambique and its European counterparts. Zimbabwe is getting assistance from China much more than it gets assistance from SADC members. In fact, now we are seeing SADC members actively sabotaging Zimbabwe by trying to deport Zimbabweans, workers, including legal workers, back to Zimbabwe, which is our biggest foreign currency earner.
I'm glad that you do raise that point. Mr. Maponga, Joshua, you recently relocated to Zimbabwe. Some would also go so far as to argue that you're coming back to Zimbabwe as a result of your inabilities to be able to find some sort of success or opportunities within South Africa. Your sentiments?
On my success story, I will allow him to share information with you. And I could live in South Africa comfortably and retire comfortably.
Right.
In a beautiful home, enough cars in my garage.
Right.
And have a flourishing career in South Africa.
Right.
I'm contributing on a number of TV and radio platforms, published a few books and etc. I'm fairly well. So in my coming back, as I say, I was deported. Well, I flew in on Monday. I'm flying back. If I'm deported and I'm coming in on business class, then everyone else must be deported.
Right.
So it's not true.
Right.
But my coming back is after spending almost 30 years of my professional life, from here to South Africa, to Swaziland, to Botswana, to Namibia, to America, to Britain. And I'm saying to myself, can't I just go back and put a little bit of what is remaining in me back into my country?
Well, when it comes to being able to bring back what's remaining to your country, others argue that your inclinations towards the current political dispensation were a complete 180.
It's a 108. I'm born in the 60s. And I hear Mozambican wars in the 70s. My father becomes the Secretary General of the Lawfelt, recruiting soldiers into Mozambican food. He's put on the death row and he's released on the amnesty of 1979. We fight the battles in Chiredzi, we fight the battles in Bolima Lisanga, in Odzi, in Bikita, and in Odzi. And you come around and you introduce a new party to me. I don't have an experience with MDC. The liberation struggle and the blood that has flown in me is no MDC. I've not been a trade unionist.
Right.
I've not worked in an industry. I don't know the dynamics of a trade union. And for me, when I'm coming back into the country, and again, there's a notion that when you support ZANU-PF, or when you sympathize with ZANU-PF, or you want to contribute towards ZANU-PF, either you're stupid, you're old, or you're a sellout.
Right.
As if when you support MDC, that's where the only place where intellectuals are found. I beg to differ.
Right.
MDC does not have the history of liberation in Zimbabwe in its hands. And you cannot take sanctions and unemployment and you employ young people to stand around and vote and shout in town. I have a comment for you. Unemployment must be given as credit to the opposition parties.
Right.
And not only that,
Why so?
if I had power in my hands, even to sue them for court and get them arrested as terrorists in the country, it should be effected.
I would like to hold you on that particular point because, commentator, you've also kind of shared that sentiment there on a various fora that to some degree you do blame the opposition for the current sanctions that Zimbabwe is experiencing. Surely in any democracy there should be a plurality to be able to allow opposition movements to also call or hold the ruling party to task or to book. I mean, is that not how democracies work?
You can definitely hold the ruling party to book, but you cannot hold the ruling party to book by undertaking a crime against humanity.
You cannot hold the nation to ransom.
Undertaking a crime against humanity that I said to you is illegal even in wartime according to the Geneva Convention. You then go and get economic weapons. Bring them upon your people to deprive them of water, healthcare, education, to deprive this of old women, old children, orphans.
How many people died from sanctions?
So that you force those people to vote for you. That's terrorism. And it's a crime against humanity, which is the highest level of international crime.
To be able to give that much credit to an opposing party that they contribute towards the economic downfall of a whole nation, there's no responsibility at all that can be taken on the side? Surely?
To me, I don't even talk about that because that's the same as when we were under colonialism and under slavery. Black people, some were lazy, some were incompetent, some were stupid, but we all understood that the overarching system, the system of this colonialism and apartheid were the reason why people were underdeveloped. Slavery underdeveloped black people. And we and even Jews, when they were under German occupation, we never said it was Jewish corruption or Jewish incompetence that put them under that position. We understood that oppression changes people's behavior.
I want to add something.
Please.
One factor, again, we cannot undermine is that when local business people, and I'll be very clear, when local business people log into an arm wrestling with international companies and they begin to pull out business under their feet, petroleum, for example, food production, for example, military weapons and etc. supply and other elements. And then you find that the local person is now coming on the picture, challenging the status quo, which has been colonial. The people that are outside, these are the multinationals, who have an interest in what is happening here. There's no way they can sit around. So you begin to isolate business people locally.
So are you saying that...
I want to explain something.
Please.
Locally and say, isolate him, isolate him, isolate him.
Sure.
Are you aware in London there are only a few families that are supplying into the government of Britain? Are you aware that America is only buying all its weapons from one or two companies that are supplying? Are you aware that Germany is working the same thing? Why is it when it comes to Zimbabwe, an African Zimbabwean is not allowed to monopolize, let me use it recklessly, to monopolize an industry? So we need champions of industry in agriculture, in medicine, in insurance, in petroleum, and local people must own local money and then buy the politicians.
Right.
And before you go,
yes,
don't forget that there's business people in this country that are black, that have done a lot of business assisted by government.
Right.
But they've sold out, transferred money out of the country, and they're not under sanctions. And the question is why?
On that particular note there, unfortunately, we have to come to the end of our discussion here tonight when it comes to all things to do with the economy. You can join us here on our Economics 101. We'll be giving you a part 2 series again next week, looking very closely at our discussion today. Pleasant view.